I've been around Pearl Harbor, though, for over 30 years. And one of the many blessings that I can count is the fact that over those years I got to meet quite a number of Pearl Harbor survivors. And not only Pearl Harbor survivors, but World War II veterans in general. So it's if you can imagine this, in the early 80s, at one time in this park, we had nearly 17 Pearl Harbor survivors that would come down and volunteer that lived here locally on the island. Today, we're down to just one man, and that's Sterling Kale, and that brother just turned 100 years old a few months ago. Now, we haven't seen Sterling not since COVID broke out. We know he's still alive, but he has not come down to volunteer in over 2 years. Okay, but I want to tell you about two veterans of the Pearl Harbor attack. I want to tell you about a Japanese veteran and American veteran. And I'm going to start off with the Japanese veteran. His name was Zenji Abe. Zenji Abe was born in the Yamaguchi prefecture of Kyushu in a little mountain village, and his father was a sake brewer. And even though his mother died at a very early age, and even though they were hard pressed by the Great Depression, Zenji's father saw to the schooling of his two sons. And that's why at the ripe old age of 14, Zenji Abe attended Itajima, which is the Japanese Naval Academy. Upon graduation, he became a naval aviator. Now, by the time about a year before the Pearl Harbor attack, he was training. There were 8 planes in his command, and they were training to near exhaustion, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Now, he flew a Kate. That's a 3-man aircraft, and it was the Kates that actually not only carried the torpedoes that day, but they also carried high-level bombs, the 16-inch naval shell. Now, his target was the west side of Fort Island. And about 5:30 on the morning of December 7th, and please don't go Google it, because I don't know if that's exactly correct, but I'm pretty sure it is. At about 5:30, the 2nd Scout plane reported back in their flyover of Pearl Harbor that there were no aircraft carriers in the harbor. So they had to shuffle the cards, but still yet, he commanded the mission that flew to the west side of Pearl Harbor. And according to Zenji, his bombs never hit any ships. However, his men did. And it did a heck of a job over there. The Tangiers, the Raleigh, and so on. One of the things that bothered Zenji after the attack of Pearl Harbor, not only Zenji, but many of the Pearl Harbor pilots that day, was the fact that their country never officially declared war before the Pearl Harbor attack. And to many Japanese pilots, this was a sign of shame. And it's something they would live with the rest of their lives. Zenji would go on and fight in several campaigns in the Pacific, and I hate to say it, but out of the 8 planes that he commanded, he was the only survivor. In 1944, during the Battle of the Marshalls, he was shot down, and he evaded capture for at least 2 weeks. Ultimately, he was captured by the Americans, and he became a POW. His wife didn't know if he was alive or dead, but in 1945, she was surprised when they repatriated him, and he went home to his wife and daughter. Okay? Post-war Japan, he became a policeman. And after he retired and he got towards his twilight years, that shame that was dwelling within his heart got the better of him, and he made it his mission to come to Pearl Harbor and find a Pearl Harbor survivor and ask for forgiveness. And in 1991, he came out with a couple other pilots for the 50th anniversary, and he reached the hand of a Pearl Harbor survivor, and that survivor took his hand. But that hand was a long time in coming to reconciliation with the Japanese. I'm going to tell you about that hand. That hand belonged to a man by the name of Richard Fisk. Richard Fisk was from Boston, Massachusetts. And not too long after his 18th birthday, he joined the Marine Corps. Following boot camp, he would go to Marine Bugle School and become a bugler. And in 1940, he would be assigned to the battleship West Virginia. Now, folks, as a bugler aboard a battleship, you got power. Your bugle sends them to chow. Your bugle sends them to pick up their mail. Your bugle sends them to go on liberty. But most importantly, your bugle sounds general quarters. And on the morning of December 7th, 1941, at 7:55, Dick had just finished the 5-minute warning to the 8 o'clock colors. And as soon as the bugle came away from his lips, all hell broke loose. Now, being outboard, the battleship West Virginia not only took torpedoes, but they took 16-inch naval shells. And in that havoc, Dick was still able to get up to his general quarters station, which was the bridge. And upon arrival at his general quarters station, not only did he witness the heroic actions of the mess steward Doris Miller, but he also saw the heroic actions of the battleship West Virginia's captain, Mervyn Bennion. And right before shrapnel would take his life, and Dick would watch his captain die in front of his eyes, Mervyn Bennion ordered counterflooding aboard the battleship West Virginia. Instead of rolling over like the Oklahoma did, the West Virginia would sink straight down. Okay? But like I said, Dick would watch his captain die, and in the next instant, an explosion would send him off the ship. When he recovered and he waded ashore on Ford Island, the only thing that wasn't covered in oil was his eyeballs. From there, Dick would stay with the West Virginia throughout her refit at Pearl Harbor and then later at Bremerton. And in 1944, just before the battleship West Virginia was to go back into action, oh, by the way, Dick's best friend was killed aboard battleship Arizona. But just before the West Virginia was ready to go back into service, Dick got orders to transfer to the 5th Marine Division. And in February of 1944, he went ashore at a little island called Iwo Jima. Now you can watch the flags of our fathers, you can watch letters from Iwo Jima, but it only scratches the surface of how awful and personal that battle for Iwo Jima was. This island was 5 miles by 3 miles big, and the Marines slugged it out with the Japanese for over 30 days. Dick would be there for 31 days, and out of the platoon of 100 men that he went in with, he would be one of 4 survivors. He would later say that Iwo Jima was like a miniature Pearl Harbor for every day he was there. Do you see the picture I'm painting of Dick? He hated anything and everything Japanese. Now, after the war was over, Dick did something as a Marine. I can't figure why he would do it, but he left the Marine Corps and he joined the Air Force. And he spent the next 20 years as an airman, and he would serve in Korea and Vietnam, and in 1969 he would retire, and not too long after that he and his wife would retire here in Honolulu. And Dick was still in contact with a lot of his Pearl Harbor buddies, and they were telling Dick, you need to come out to the Arizona and volunteer. Well, this is the early 80s, and Dick already noticed that there was a lot of Japanese visitors visiting the Arizona Memorial. He wasn't comfortable around Japanese. But after they worked on him, he finally relented, and he came down to volunteer. But the only thing he would do when he would volunteer, he'd go out to the Arizona Memorial, and that's where he liked it. He liked to be out on the memorial. One day, he was coming back from the memorial, and our historian, Daniel Martinez, saw him, and he could see that Dick was emotionally upset. And so Daniel walked over and said, "Dick, what's wrong?" And Dick, with tears coming down his eyes, said, "Danny, you're not going to believe it. I was just out at the memorial, and this older Japanese lady grabbed my arm, looked into my eyes, and she wanted to apologize for her country's bombing of Pearl Harbor. And moreover, she said that her fiance was one of the pilots during the Pearl Harbor attack. He never came back. But nevertheless, she wanted to apologize for the attack of Pearl Harbor." Well, that stone heart that he had towards the Japanese started to crack that day. And then here it was, 50th commemoration, 1991. He sees these Japanese pilots talking to a bunch of his Pearl Harbor buddies, and Dick is standing in the peripheral. And next thing you know, this Japanese pilot comes right up to Dick, and he sticks out his arm. Well, Dick is not a barbarian, so he took the hand. But as he looked into the eyes of that pilot, and he saw the sincerity when that pilot told him he was sorry for the Pearl Harbor attack, the last remnants of that stone heart towards the Japanese that Dick had totally cracked in half. And that day, not only did he befriend that pilot, who was Zenji Abe, by the way, but they became brothers. Matter of fact, they would later take a dollar bill and rip it in half, and every time they would meet, they would match up the two ends of the dollar bill. Before he died, Zenji Abe went by a local florist in Honolulu and set up in perpetuity that once a month, 2 roses would be delivered to the Arizona Memorial. One for the Japanese and one in remembrance for the Americans. Dick made it his mission to take those roses and place them at the wall of the Arizona. But he did one better. He would bring his bugle and he would blow taps. Not once, but twice. One for the Japanese and one for the Arizona. And Dick would do that all the way up until he died in 2004. Zenji would pass on in 2007, and poor little me is so humbled that I got to know both of them before they passed on. And I guess it's up to me to continue their story. I'm going to tell you something real personal. When my wife died nearly 5 years ago, and I came back to work at Pearl Harbor, the one person that had my back was Tomo Shoemaker. Tomomi Shoemaker was married to, she was Japanese, and she was married to a retired, well, he retired now, but he was a senior chief. And guess what we would do once a month? We would go out to the Arizona, and we would place those roses, one for the Japanese and one for the Americans. Thank you.